Welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast, the show that invites you to take a seat around the community fire and listen to stories that inspire. I'm your host, Kathy Robinson, author, coach, and founder of Athena Wellness, a company that's dedicated to supporting you on your journey to live more wholeheartedly. Hello, and welcome to episode 99. Thanks so much for joining me. Today's show is quite different, and I'm so excited to share it with you for a number of reasons. The first is I got to spend time with one of my favorite people in the world, Kristie McLean. Longtime listeners will remember Kristie from episode 7, which is one of our most popular shows. Back in October, Kristie flew across the country to attend a special family event and graciously agreed to help me test out a new podcast concept. Since I started this show, I've had a dream of taking it on the road, visiting guests on their home turf, and capturing the conversation on portable equipment. Before embarking on such a trip, I wanted to test out the gear, and it seemed wise to test it out on myself, which is what this podcast is all about. Kristie turned the mic and interviewed me, and at the same time, I was able to work out any technical glitches. Here's what we cover: the act of reinvention, the twists, turns, and blessings of life's journey, storytelling, lessons learned from podcast guests, and the beauty and gifts of everyday life. The gathering that we all attended that weekend was a celebration of my father's upcoming birthday. He'll turn 100 years old in January. It was the most social activity we've had since the start of the pandemic, which you'll hear in my hoarse voice, the result of lots of talking, fits of doubled-over laughter, and maybe a little bit of bourbon. And I also learned that mobile recording is not without its challenges. You'll notice some erratic vocal levels, and you'll hear the noise of an idling vehicle about 2/3 of the way through. But all in all, I'm considering this Vancast a success, and I look forward to bringing you more Vancasts in 2022 with a wide range of interesting guests. Lastly, I want to thank Kristie for gracing us with her warmth and wisdom once again. I'll link up Kristie's earlier podcast episode along with her contact information in the show notes. And now on to the show. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
This is Kristie McLean here with Kathy Robinson. To set the scene, we are in the most amazing vanmobile looking out into a forest with filtered sunlight through the fall leaves, and it's really a spectacular October day. So I feel thrilled to be here in the inaugural interviewing of Kathy Robinson. So, Kathy, what is it about the format of podcasts that is so interesting to you?
I started getting into podcasts when I was commuting to and from my corporate job, learning new things, being open to new ideas, and the format was great. It was 30, 45 minutes. I would listen most of the way in, and then I'd have something on the way back, and I literally would plan my commutes based on, and my runs too. So I love the fact that I could play it in my car, I could play it when I ran, on airplanes, and I was learning something new. I felt like there were so many different topics that I could listen to. So when I wrote the book and COVID hit and I couldn't go out on a book tour, I went out on a podcast tour, and to my delight, I was like, I really like being a guest. That was really a lot of fun. And then I wondered what it would be like to actually be in the other seat and see what that would feel like. And I adore it. It's one of the most fun things I've ever done professionally. And I can't wait to see how the podcast continues and thrives on. And I hope I give the audience the same thing that I got from others, that there's just this sense of possibility and new ideas and new things for them to think about and to consider as they try different things in their lives.
Awesome. I know when you and I talked some months ago, you had asked me We talked about this idea of living life in chapters. And I know for you, when you asked the question to me, what were the signposts along the way, right, that led you to where you are right now? And so I have the same question, what experiences and touch points in your own life have guided you toward this chapter?
It's so much easier to see it in other people, right? So, and I have a little bit of hindsight now, which is helpful, but if you would have asked me this a year ago, I was still kind of sorting through it all. Now I look back and it's like, oh, there literally has been a road that I was following. It didn't feel that way. It felt like part one of life, and then I was waiting for part two. But now when I look back, I can see, oh, this whole journey, it wasn't part one. It was just the beginning of what you're doing now. As far as the signposts, when I think of the things that have really shaped who I am, it was, as much as it wasn't what I thought I was meant to do working in the corporate world, it gave me so much, and it gave me so much by way of experience. How to run a business, how to market yourself, now these were things I didn't do for a living, but I observed them. It was my job to actually make observation and make recommendations. So I had this bird's eye view of everything that a company did, never realizing that, hey, someday this is really going to come in handy. Like, you're going to need to know some of these things. The difference between strategy and being tactical and how to actually create a plan. So those types of things. But the other experiences, as far as trying to problem solve with other people, come up with actionable steps that we can take to make something better, all of the traveling that I did and all of the people that I got to meet, all of this was thrown in the pot, creating this stew that was going to be not only nourishing, but really helpful as time went on. And only now I look back at that and go, wow, yeah, if it wasn't for XYZ, I would have never known how to do X. So there were definitely signposts from a business standpoint. There were definitely signposts from an experience standpoint, and all the things that I got to do in the world, which has been amazing. And now there's this sense of settling in, of going deeper. So for the first 35 years of my professional career, it was overview. It was quick stops, being in places for a few days, going from place to place to place. Now there's this sense of deepening. There's this sense of being rooted. There's a sense of wanting to go more vertical than horizontal. And I don't know what that's all going to turn into, but it is very compelling. Like, I no longer want to be jetting around on a plane, going to all these different places. There's something about a sense of place to create something more, I don't know if it's a sense of legacy or a sense of what I can leave behind, but there's something that's in the depth rather than the breadth right now.
I love that. I can really see that. And it feels especially poignant to hear you say that when we're sitting in a forest surrounded by vertical trees.
Exactly, yeah. And roots.
Roots grow down, trees grow up. So switching gears a little bit, and especially to those who are listening, who maybe have their own dreams of podcasting and trying to really learn from you as a practitioner, where do you find your guests, and what generates a resonance in you that their stories will be interesting to you and listeners?
That's a great question. So there are services which, interestingly enough, I was unaware of when I started this. I was so relieved there was actually a place that I could go to find folks who, there's a story that they want to tell, and this is a means for them to do it. And they're looking for me just like I'm looking for them. So that it's great that there is this, I say a marketplace, but there's no exchange. It's just a meeting place, which is great. So there are a number of services that can do that if somebody's interested in that. Second part of your question?
How do you know that their stories will be interesting?
Yeah. So when I started, it was all wellness, right? I was doing all these different wellness things, and then it broadened. So we were talking about, depth, and now I'm going back to broaden. But what's interesting to me is that they took a chance, they took a leap, they made a pivot of some sort. They were going down a particular road and suddenly there was a turn and they decided to follow it. And what happened as a result? So a lot of times, actually almost all the time, it does relate to wellness, because when you're really congruent with yourself and you know you're listening to that inner voice to make that turn, that's all part of wellness. That's all part of well-being. That's all part of living a good life. So I think that there is that thread of wellness, but not the wellness in you have to exercise or eat well or the things that you usually hear on wellness podcasts. So it's more of a well-being theme, I think. But I love those getting into the stories of not just the turns that were made, but the why and what led up to that. And so what's great about the podcast format is that it's not a 10-minute tell me your story. We have space to be able to roam a little bit and get to the preliminary turning points before it came to the main turning point, and to be able to explore that, because that's where we find the commonality. And maybe that's what helped me answer that first question that you asked me of like, what were those signposts? Hearing other people's stories of like, oh, I wasn't the only one who thought they were on a road that they were going to completely switch and do something else. Like there was no relation. It's like, wow, everything was related. Isn't that interesting? And then you get to dive deeper into somebody else's story and you find the same thing, that in looking back with enough hindsight that they were always on this road. They never thought they would wind up in this place, but it makes sense once they made that leap and they decided to go down that road.
You said something just now that I find really, really interesting. And so there's thoughts bouncing all over my head. One is this idea that there's spaciousness in your conversations to be able to lean and move. You know, going back to the tree analogy, when trees have strong roots, I'm thinking of bamboo. Even when bamboo is really strong, then it can sway and move and be supple, and there's no danger of it breaking, right? And I think sometimes the conversations that you shape and share with people allow that movement and room to roam. What's interesting is you're the most prepared and disciplined person that I know in my life. I mean, you're a phenom of organization. And we share a common friend and mentor, Christina Baldwin. And one thing that I always remember that she says is, you should never know what you're going to say until the moment you say it. And she may not have been the author of that quote, but she was the one that tucked that piece of knowledge in my being. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, when you're in these conversations, I know that you're prepared. I know that you have the frame of what you want to say. And how do you handle the tension between these two spaces? So one is, I imagine there must be plenty of people that do podcasts that do it flying by the seat of their pants. Mm-hmm. And from what I know of you from many years, this is not your style. Right. You're so prepared and thoughtful about shaping the arc of this experience. And so how does that play with this idea of leaving room for suppleness and surprise?
Mm-hmm. What's interesting is that you actually had two key words in there. One is that you mentioned Christina, and the second you just said arc. So what I do, I actually have, and this has evolved over the year, but I actually have a pre-conversation with anybody that's on the podcast. And before we meet, I go through their website, listen to any podcast that they've done. If they have a podcast, I listen to their episodes, read their books, and I prepare a narrative arc. And so it's this arc of the conversation that would be great if it is what it is. But I always tell them, this is just a blueprint. First of all, does this resonate? And I take any feedback that they have. And then secondly, this is a starting point. And if we totally go off course, I welcome that, because that's where the energy is, right? We'll follow the energy when it happens. And I think what that does on both ends, it makes the guests relax, because they at least know that there's a plan, you know, that they're not going to get hit with something that they're not intending. And then on my side, I know at least, well, if we stick to the conversation as it is, it will be fine. But inevitably it doesn't, because of that sense of we already have a connection, we already have a plan. And I think that allows for the flexibility to follow the conversation where it goes. And I just had an interview earlier this week where it was very emotional for the guests. And I think because we had gone through this process, because we did have that connection, there was that sense of letting go. So there's that letting go of the guest, but also for me, I can let go because I don't have an expectation then. Where the conversation goes is where it needs to go. And that's part of the curiosity then of like, I wonder where this is going. And it keeps me engaged because it's almost like we're on a road trip together. And, someone's going to say, turn left, turn right. And we're just going to follow it where it goes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That hasn't happened yet, thankfully. But, if it happens, it happens. A Thelma and Louise moment going off the cliff with a guest. But yeah, that's kind of the game plan. So in the preparation, at least for me, that gives me a lot of freedom to say, okay, I've prepared myself enough that I'm ready, the Girl Scout, right? I'm ready for whatever's going to happen and let's let it unfold. And I love being surprised by it.
Thank you. That's wonderful. One of the things that I love in my own life is walking through neighborhoods at night and seeing all of the houses that are lit up with lamps in their windows and being able to see, even from afar, people quietly going about their lives and doing whatever they're doing. There was a story when I was a child called The Story of the 14 Bears, and it's all of these bears that are living in hollow trees, and all of the trees are different inside. And there's some with, a Chinese screen and Asian art, and there's the homey one with the aprons and the fuzzy slippers, and they're all different. And I really think that book actually sparked my curiosity of the world. And so when you are interviewing all of these folks and sharing these resonant stories that you've had so many experiences so far, what are some of the jewels that you personally will remember and take with you from past guests?
That's a great question. If I had to summarize, and I'll go deeper on a couple of these, but I think the theme, there's no one right way to live a life. And the ones where I walk away and feel so energized when it's done are those folks that are really, they have followed their own dream, whatever that was. I interviewed somebody, it's not live yet, a week ago. A guy bought a sailboat and sailed solo and taught himself how to sail, and then a year later, he sold all of his possessions and said, this is my life. I'm going to make my living writing and sailing. Whoa. Like a 40-something-year-old guy that's just like, this is it. This is what I want to do. And he's doing it. And to have that conversation and to hear him talk about his days and what it's like to dive down into these blue holes and how careful you have to be because you're alone, and tether yourself while you're on the deck and you're sailing, and how you have to sleep in 20-minute increments because that's the time it takes. If you can't see something in your instruments or on the horizon, it takes 20 minutes for it to be upon you. And so you sleep, and he sets his timer and comes up. I mean, unbelievable. Like, I was breathless in a good way by the time we were done with that conversation. And it's just like, here was a guy who was a musician and a carpenter in Florida that is just like, no, I want to do something completely different. And so it's those kinds of stories that's just like, there is no one right way. There is the right way for you, and it is forever unfolding. And so that gives me not only a lot of hope for humanity, but I think like the more people that do this, Jackie, this is a sweet, open, curious, wants to meet a whole bunch of people, learn different things. Like, he's just so engaged with life. And I think that's a common thread as well. There's a lot of folks who were in corporate that had that dream of something different. And it's like, I want to be an artist. Well, were you artistic as a kid? No, not really. But now, like, that's the way she makes her living. And she's got an online membership and she teaches other people how to paint. Not all of them quit their jobs and start businesses, but to be able to spread that kind of joy and hope, like, this is what you get to do with your days. I could have never imagined that 20, 30 years ago, commuting in and out of New York. And again, it was very formative. It was almost like, taking your vitamins and doing all those things that you need to do. But I think that hearing those stories time and time again, it doesn't matter what the backdrop is. It's more of that transformation of, I was this, now I'm this. Tell me that story. What happened there? What transformation happened? What allowed you to happen? And then one of the questions I always ask is, a lot of people hear those stirrings, but you did it. What was it that allowed you to do it at that time? Like, what was that? And those are some of the things that we get to explore and unpack. And all those reasons are different. So it's not the same story you're hearing over and over again, but it's just, what was that point where it's like, you know what? I just can't do this anymore. It's time to leap. And sometimes it's a crescendo, like these little things were happening. And sometimes, as happens, the universe steps in and says, oh, no, we're deploying your husband to Afghanistan. Therefore, you need to stay home and take care of the kids. What am I going to do? Oh, maybe I'll start a business. Maybe I can teach. Maybe I can do something like that. And then things start to unfold. Very few people have a grand master plan. And if they do, much like I thought I did, it's like, well, that will change. It's inevitable. It's going to change. And that's part of if you can relax into that, as my guests have taught me over and over again, it's like, if you can relax into that, that's where the magic happens. It happens in those moments of like, oh, I thought I was turning right. I'm turning left, but wow, I would have never gone down this road. Look. And that's the exciting part.
I love that. I think about music, and if you want to be a jazz musician, you start out learning classical music, or at least classical chords and scales, and learning fingerings and things in order to riff and go off script, so to speak. Right. So I'm hearing a lot of that, like the corporate landscape prepared you to be able to be sitting out here in the woods.
I would dream, and I don't take it for granted when I am out here working, and I actually can work now, be mobile and remote. And I do not take that for granted. I'm incredibly grateful for all of that. And the fact that technology has changed such, and the world, that no, you don't have to be sitting across from me to coach. I'm more than comfortable, client, being on the phone with you, coach, and having this conversation. So it's divine timing. It's the perfect storm. You can put any word to it, but it's just this coming together of things that felt very elusive. And suddenly, it's almost like, I'm going to date myself, but you're a photographer, so you'll appreciate this, being in the dark room, right? So there was something on there, and it starts to come alive, and you think you can make out the image, but it's really something different. That has been the feeling, that things just come into view. It's a little bit sharper and sharper. And I think that's what happens with the guests and the stories that they share as well.
You mentioned coaching, and I'm smiling because my next question is really about that. So in my work of coaching, I'm very familiar with the concept of self as coach. So often a client will show up with an exact struggle in an area that I myself need to learn. Or it doesn't even have to be a struggle. It can be, something that I'm aspiring to, and this person is succeeding and they're already light years ahead of where I might be. So for you, and you've answered some of this, but what lessons are you, Kathy, learning through the conversations with your podcast guests?
I think a big one, and this is going to sound so trite, but this is a really big lesson, and that is about enjoying the journey. Because I have always been, what's that next goal? What's that next goal? Put it out there, achieve it, keep going, and not stopping to celebrate. And so as a result of some of these conversations and taking that lesson to heart, I do, and you won't be surprised, have a 1-page on Sunday nights. I come up, I take a look at my calendar and what I need to do for the week. And I have all of my activities on one piece of paper, so I know what I need to do for that week, because if I don't write it down, it doesn't happen. But at the bottom left-hand corner is its own box, and it says celebrate. And so what is it either the week before that you're really proud of? Write that down. Or what are you looking forward to that you can celebrate, either a milestone or with somebody else? Like, what is it that's going on? So as you know, and the reason why Kristie is even here in New Jersey is because my dad we celebrated his 100th, soon to be 100th birthday with family and friends over the weekend. And in the bottom corner, it's like, what better celebration is there than that, right? Like, wow. Exactly. 100 healthy years, bless him. So, and then also in the that was lower right, upper left-hand side, and this was a new add to the sheet, is word of the week. So what is it? If I was feeling a little scattered a couple of weeks ago, and so I knew I needed to focus, getting ready for the party and everything that was coming my way. So it might be something like focus, or it might be something like smile, or lighten up, or like whatever, enjoy. Or in the springtime, it's like, get out and take a walk. What is it that I have to remind myself for the week? And those two little anchors of something to keep me grounded, and then something to say, you know what a great week because X happened. That's been my practice.
Roots and wings.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So coming out of a corporate career and reinventing yourself as an author and wellness coach and speaker, what surprises you with similarities and differences between these two worlds? Where is there maybe unexpected overlap that you didn't think would be there?
I very much structure and prepare in the same way. So I think the corporate world, when you present to a board of directors of a Fortune 250 company multiple times a year, you learn how to prepare to speak. You learn how to prepare to give a presentation. And I am so grateful to have gone through, it was like boot camp. And that makes things, when someone says, hey, can you do X? Not a problem. I can do that. And it comes from that practice. So I think preparing for something like that, preparing for the podcast guest is very much like preparing for a big, important meeting, right? That same thing. And how do you provide context and make people feel held and seen? It's more subtle on the corporate side, but it very much came into play there. So I think there were many more similarities, many more things that I could leverage than I could have ever anticipated when I was making the crossover. And I'm very grateful for that. Where it differs, there was always common objectives. There were always common goals. There was always that great job, high five, whether it was me doing to somebody else or somebody else doing that to me. If I accomplished something, and then suddenly you are a company of one. So that framework, those shared like if I don't set a goal or an objective, nobody cares if I do it or not. They did when I was in corporate. Nobody cares now. Write a book, don't write a book. So that self-motivation became much more important. I had a boss in corporate when I was up and coming, and he would always tell the team, before you can convince somebody else what you do is important, you first have to convince yourself. I never forgot that. And boy, when you're your own boss, it becomes even more so. What that has done, though, it has helped me become much more discerning, because it's me. I'm the admin. I have to go to the post office. I'm doing all of the things that I had teams of people doing for me. Now it's me. So, okay, you want to do a podcast? You have to learn how to edit and write and contact and email and get it up on the website. So are you up for doing that? So it's being very deliberate with time spent. And the payback the return on investment isn't dollars all the time. Some of it, like the podcast, is very much connection and network and storytelling and doing things, trying to bring all the elements of the things that I love together in a way, and not knowing what the outcome is and being okay with that because it feels that good to do. So decision making too has changed very much, where before you'd had to do a business case and it's like either it made sense or it didn't. there's different reasons for doing things now and being deliberate. But when you find something that really feels right, like going all in.
There's this idea of what are you willing to work hard for? I live by that a lot. There's never a free ride, right? What do you want to put the effort into is what I'm hearing.
Right.
And the same discipline and the same focus and the same effort is still happening for you. I'm really hearing that. Mm-hmm. And staying as a guest in your home this past week, you know, you're at the gym at 6 a.m., you know, by noon, you've already done 2 hours of writing workshops. It's astounding. And one of the things you and I talked about the other day when we were walking is there is the ability, as you choose it, to shape your own time, you know, if that's the rhythm and the flow of your days. So in the morning, getting up, using your body, you know, having nourishing foods, connecting with others in a shared community, having time for you, keeping things around you that inspire and keeping you focused and moving forward, and being able to do that on your terms to a large extent, I think is probably different than the corporate world where you had meetings at, you know, 9 and 2 and 4 and 6:30 and 10.
And yeah. And there has definitely been, it's an energetic alignment of when I'm best. I'm actually able to align my schedule with when I'm sharpest for that thing. So yeah, if I don't work out first thing in the morning, I know I don't get up like, oh, yay, I'm going to the gym. But once that's done, it's like, that was the time to do it. Like, there is no doubt I'm better then. And then if I don't do the creative stuff first thing, 8 o'clock and 11 o'clock, if that's not done then, I'm much better with administrative stuff in the afternoon where I can do what I need to do. I can reply to email. Like, that doesn't take a whole lot of concerted thought power, and also too to get out for a walk in the afternoon to kind of clear your head. I also find that if I push myself to go out, I'm much more productive when I get back for those few hours, and then I still have a hard time closing that laptop lid. Someone told me when I switched from corporate to working from home, I said, I'm just going to be so happy to be able to like put a load of laundry in on a Wednesday. And she said, that'll get old. And I will tell you, it is not, you know, because that's what weekends used to be. Like, it used to be food shopping and laundry and getting ready for the week. And to be able to incorporate that and feel like you're not so bifurcated. It's much more of an integrated feeling of living in an integrated way. And I really, really do appreciate that.
So just a couple thoughts left before we wrap up. But one is, I'm thinking of your future podcast guests and people that you haven't found yet, or they may be listening to your show and thinking that maybe they themselves could be interesting or have an interesting story, or they know someone and they're perhaps a little hesitant to step forward. I remember back when you and I had a conversation and later hearing that final piece, and I was so touched by how it came together. I mean, I personally felt so seen and heard. And usually I'm very self-critical, and, you know, I think a lot of people don't like the sound of their voice, and there was various levels of anxiety around that. But the experience as a guest was, you made it easy and fun and enjoyable, and it was thoughtfully crafted. And I know you're so accomplished, and you're also really humble. So I know that you don't often share feedback that you've gotten from other folks. But this past week, I've had the opportunity to hear a little bit of feedback that you've shared from podcast guests. And I wonder if you would be able to share with listeners, what are some of the podcast guests saying about the experience of being a guest with you?
Wow. Well, first of all, you were gracious enough to be on episode 7, just to be clear, when I had no clue what I was doing. And in preparing for that, it actually helped shape what I do today. So I appreciate your willingness to do that. And I actually think yours is one of, if not the it's second of most listened to episodes. So you've got that going for you.
That's me, really.
So there.
Those are from different
so
email addresses.
It was all you. Different devices. Right. Can you download this? What thrills me is when we're having a conversation and a guest says, that's a really good question. I love that. I love that because my work in all those years in corporate, auditor means to listen. And so my job was to ask questions and to be able to listen. And so I feel like I'm doing my job if they hadn't thought about something in that way, or if they feel like they need to take a pause and really give it some thought. I feel like we hit one of those veins that I love to explore more. So that is one. The other is sometimes they'll say, this was really easy or it was really fun, and that makes me feel good because, as you said, there's preparation that comes with that. I really love that. But as of late, and I think, I'm learning as I'm going, and I think I'm more mindful of how to really hold space when somebody's feeling vulnerable without it being said, because we can see each other. Even though only the audio is captured for the podcast, I can usually see the guest. There's a video there. And to be able to keep that eye contact, keep calm when emotions run high, and to afterwards, as we debrief, I always put my hand on my mic. I always put my hand on my heart and say, how are you feeling? And this past week, it was, we had some vulnerable conversations, and they said, never expected to go down that route, but I'm really glad we did. And thank you so much for being able to help me through that or to explore that. And the fact that there's that kind of trust there with somebody that you just met, I come off of those conversations feeling amazing. Having had the privilege to be able to hold that space to have that conversation. And then when I go back and edit, because I do all the editing myself, it's a second time to be able to revisit that and really hear. Because I'm listening, you're looking at recording levels, you're trying to keep people engaged, and to hear it that second time when I get a chance to shape it a bit, that's just the icing on the cake. I just love that. As far as the feedback goes, it's those things that when I hang up that phone and I just close that laptop and I just have a big smile on my face that, yeah, that's a really good day at the office.
Yay. So from a practical standpoint, do you ever do call outs for certain kinds of stories, or how should people and why should people drop you a line if they think that there's an interesting story to share?
Yeah. Some of the best stories are ones that aren't fully shaped. As an example, the gentleman on the sailboat, he's a year or two into his adventure. He's hoping he can continue to, he's learning as he goes. So I think if there's that sense of curiosity, of learning, of wanting to explore together, I am more than happy to sketch out a storyline that we could explore. But if somebody is willing to sit and have a conversation about some sense of transformation, of personal transformation or professional transformation, sometimes it is something more along the lines of wellness. Sometimes it's writing or storytelling, and sometimes it's just a life adventure, becoming an artist after being an IT project manager, just a crazy leap like that. And it's all welcome. But yeah, if there's a sense of wanting to explore and not having all the answers, that's great ground to kind of dig in and spend some time chatting.
For me, that's super heartening and really welcome, because for those of us that don't have all the answers figured out, it's much more compelling to listen to somebody who is still in the thick of it. And you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, it's so much easier to see it in other people, and to sometimes say, oh, as you've been talking, I've seen this lantern and this lantern and this lantern, and they actually have been lighting your path for a really long time.
Right.
This isn't something accidental or something that just happened last week.
Exactly.
But those stories of blossoming, for me, allow me to blossom. Mm-hmm. Versus somebody that has everything figured out, where maybe I hear that and I might tremble at ever wanting to begin, because I'm, there's this idea that being gentle with ourselves, and when we are beginners, we should not compare ourselves to someone who has mastery. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important.
Also, too, I think we're in a world where we are shown things that are curated to the hilt. And when somebody is in something and, it's a little messy and they're figuring it out and they don't mind sharing that, I think there's a real resonance for me. Like, I want to know more. I become much more attuned to what that person is doing. I become much more interested than something that's this glossy, finished photo. And it's like, dime a dozen. Let's get into something, let's explore something, let's have a real conversation. And it's my hope that that's what listeners are resonating with, that this is just a real conversation, somebody just like them, trying to figure it out. And if you can walk away with one idea or one Google search or, something that just gets tucked away for another time, I feel like I've done my job.
I'm having this flash as you're talking at, like, I'm calling you from the bottom of the mine. And, all I can see is in my headlamp. That's so much more interesting. And then to have the Kathy Robinson on the other end of the phone saying, what do you hear? And when you turn your head a little to the left, what are you seeing? Mm-hmm. Or is that vein of gold visible? Right? Is it wet? Is it cold? Is it damp? Describe this for us. Mm-hmm. That's a lot more compelling than someone said, hey, I went on a trip and I saw this thing.
Right, exactly.
Retroactively, right?
Exactly. And now, I have a short list of people that I want to visit next year, and to be able to take this on the road, this will be something new. Being in somebody else's environment, even though it's my van, but being on their home turf, I think is going to be really interesting too, because that's another level of comfort. Mm-hmm. And I have one particular author in mind and a favorite place of hers that she's written about. And it's my dream to be like, let's go there with the equipment, someplace she's completely comfortable in. Let's see what stories come out then. Because my guess is, I'm sure she's probably had conversations like that with friends, but maybe not in this way. And where might those conversations go? So I'm super excited about 2022 and starting to plan that out. And I thank you so much, as you were one of my very first guests, that you were open enough to turn the tides here on me so we could test out all the equipment. We can be in the van. I think this is going to work out pretty well.
It's pretty cool. There's windows on all sides.
Exactly. I'm going to get some sparkly lights in here and make it really homey. And we'll see where this all leads.
Well, thank you for pulling back the curtain a little bit on the magic of Kathy Robinson and the landscape of podcasting.
And thank you so much for your very thoughtful questions. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Okay.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I know there are many ways you can spend your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with me. Until our paths cross again, be kind to yourself and show your warrior spirit some love. If you know anyone who could benefit from today's episode, please pass it on. And many thanks for supporting the show by subscribing and leaving a review. It means a lot, and it helps others find their way to our circle. If you'd like to access the show notes, have a question you'd like addressed on a future episode, or would like a transcript of this episode, visit www.athenawellness.com/podcast. Until next time, be well.